I walked into the living room, the weight of the decision I had just made pressing heavily on my chest. My parents were sitting there, their eyes expectant, though they could not have known how much they were about to lose. The silence between us was suffocating. My father, David, sat with his stern expression, his sharp gaze fixed on me like a hawk watching its prey. My mother, Catherine, sat beside him, her eyes red from the tears she had been holding back for days. She had always been the softer of the two, but even she couldn't hide the storm brewing inside her. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for," my father said, his voice trembling with disbelief. His words hung in the air, thick with disappointment. "Don't you see the impact this will have?" He paused, searching my face for any sign of remorse, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. I shook my head, feeling my heart race as I spoke, trying to steady my breath. "I do see the impact, Dad, but this is my life, not yours. I have to live for myself." My voice dropped to a whisper as I added, "Jack makes me happy in a way I've never felt before, and I can't ignore that anymore." I saw the shock on their faces, the disbelief and hurt, especially in my mother's eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to push back the tears, but they escaped anyway, trickling down her cheeks. My father's face was unreadable, though the lines around his mouth tightened in a grimace of frustration. The air between us was thick, filled with the things we could not say, the distance that had been growing for years but now felt insurmountable. "We only want what's best for you," my mother said, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "We thought we were guiding you toward a successful and fulfilling life. How could you turn your back on all of that? On us?" I felt my throat tighten, the words I had rehearsed 1,000 times slipping away in the face of their pain. "I understand," I said softly, my voice breaking. "But your vision of what's best for me isn't the same as what I need for myself. I love you both, but I have to follow my own path." The words were out there, and once they were, there was no taking them back. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My mother's sobs filled the room, and my father's cold stare remained fixed on me, as though I were a stranger he no longer recognized. I had always known this moment might come, but facing it was an entirely different thing. I had made my choice, but at what cost? I glanced at them one last time, my heart breaking as I tried to reconcile the love I felt for them with the life I wanted to build for myself. The disappointment in their eyes was almost too much to bear, but I held firm. Jack had shown me a love I never thought possible, a love that was real and free, untethered by the weight of expectations. And for that, I had to walk away from everything I had known. "Goodbye," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, before turning and walking out the door, not knowing if I would ever look back. Growing up, I always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My twin sister, Olivia, was everything my parents had ever wanted, smart, driven, and always the picture of perfection. While I struggled to meet their expectations, Olivia seemed to glide through life, never missing a step. She aced every exam, was always praised by Dad for her academic achievements, and carried herself with the grace of someone who had it all figured out. Meanwhile, I was the one who seemed to constantly be falling short, trying to fit into a mold that never quite fit me. Our parents, David and Catherine Bennett, were the epitome of discipline and structure. Dad, a respected professor, had spent his entire life dedicated to his career, pushing us to excel in every aspect of our lives, especially academically. He had high standards, not just for himself, but for his family. There was no room for mediocrity. And then there was Mom, graceful, poised, and devoted to maintaining the perfect image of our family. She believed that success was not just about achievements, but about maintaining an impeccable reputation, something she worked tirelessly to protect. I always felt like I was in the spotlight, under constant observation, my every move scrutinized. The more I tried to live up to their expectations, the more I realized that I wasn't being true to myself. My achievements, no matter how hard I worked for them, never seemed to matter. Dad always praised Olivia for her accomplishments, seeing her as the reflection of his success, while Mom pushed me to be the perfect daughter in her image. She wanted me to follow the traditional path, get good grades, land a prestigious job, marry someone suitable, and keep the family's reputation intact. I couldn't help but feel suffocated by the weight of their dreams for me, but no matter how hard I tried, I always felt like I was falling short. I wore the clothes they chose for me, followed the rules they set, and did everything in my power to be the daughter they wanted. But deep down, a part of me was screaming for freedom, for a chance to make my own choices. I didn't want to live in Olivia's shadow anymore, and I didn't want to be defined by the image they had crafted for me. At first, it was small acts of rebellion. I started wearing eyeliner that was a little too bold, choosing clothes that were just a bit out of their comfort zone. They noticed, of course, and disapproved. To them, it was a sign of rebellion, but to me, it was a sign of freedom. I was taking baby steps toward finding who I truly was, and in doing so, I was slowly but surely peeling away the layers of the life they had tried to build for me. But the pressure to conform was overwhelming. Every time I made a decision that was different from what they expected, I felt the weight of their disappointment. Every compliment they gave Olivia, every word of praise for her achievements, felt like a sharp reminder of my own failures. And yet, despite all of that, I couldn't ignore the pull inside me, the pull to live for myself, to be true to who I really was. It wasn't about rejecting their love or guidance, but about finding a way to live authentically, even if it meant disappointing them. Before I share what happened next, the moment that truly changed the course of my life, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt the weight of someone else's expectations on your shoulders, hit that like button because this story is just getting started. It was a rainy afternoon when I first met Jack. I was buried in a stack of books in the university library, trying to keep my mind focused on a research paper I had put off for weeks. The quiet hum of the library, the soft rustle of pages turning, felt like the only refuge from the chaos in my mind. The pressure to succeed, to meet my parents' standards, had been weighing on me for years, and it seemed like no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. And then, he walked in. Jack didn't look like anyone I had ever met before. He wasn't dressed in the sharp suit my father would have approved of, nor did he have that air of perfection Olivia always seemed to exude. He wore a worn leather jacket, his hair messy in that effortlessly cool way, and a slight smile tugged at his lips, as if he knew something the rest of us didn't. The moment he walked past my table, I felt a strange pull, an unexpected connection I couldn't explain. He wasn't the kind of person who cared about fitting in, and that alone made him stand out to me. At first, I didn't think he would notice me. I was just another face in the crowd of stressed-out students. But when our eyes met, something shifted. He smiled, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the most genuine thing I had experienced in a long time. He walked over to my table, his presence calming the storm inside me. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, his voice low and inviting. I nodded, surprised by the ease with which he spoke to me. He pulled out the chair across from mine and sat down, casually flipping through a magazine. We didn't talk at first, just sat there in the quiet, as if the world around us had disappeared. But then, Jack spoke. "You seem like you've got a lot on your mind," he said, breaking the silence. I looked up, caught off guard. I hadn't realized how much my frustration had been written on my face. "You could say that," I replied, a small laugh escaping my lips. "I feel like I'm constantly trying to meet everyone else's expectations. It's exhausting." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I get it. Life's easier when you stop trying to meet other people's expectations. It's like you spend all this time trying to be what others want, and in the end, you lose yourself." His words struck a chord deep inside me. It was as if he could see right through the walls I had built around myself. He wasn't just talking about life in general. It felt personal, like he understood exactly what I was going through. The more we talked, the more I realized how different he was from everyone I had ever known. Jack didn't have a blueprint for his life. He didn't follow the rules, and yet he was so comfortable with who he was. As our conversation continued, I found myself laughing for the first time in what felt like forever. We talked about everything: his work as a carpenter, the things that made him happy, the way he viewed the world. His freedom, his ability to live life without the weight of expectations, was something I had always longed for but had never been able to grasp. Jack was everything I wasn't, and in that moment, everything I needed. The more time I spent with Jack, the more I began to feel a sense of liberation. With him, I didn't have to pretend. I could be myself. No expectations, no judgments. He made me feel like I could finally breathe, like I didn't have to live in the shadow of my parents' plans for me. There was no pressure, no need to measure up to anyone. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was enough, just as I was. As the evening wore on, and the last rays of the setting sun filtered through the library windows, Jack reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was gentle but firm, like a promise. "I know we've only just met, but I think we could have something special," he said quietly, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "I see a future for us, one where we both live for ourselves, not anyone else. A future where we don't have to fit into anyone else's mold." The words hung in the air, and for the first time I didn't feel scared. I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Jack wasn't offering me a fairy tale or an easy path, but he was offering me something even more valuable: the chance to live my life on my own terms. And in that moment, I knew that everything was about to change. The day I decided to introduce Jack to my parents was the day I knew everything would change. I had never felt so nervous in my life. Standing at the threshold of their house, my heart pounding in my chest, I wanted them to see Jack the way I did, the man who made me feel seen, who made me feel like I could finally breathe. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't see him that way. They couldn't. He wasn't the kind of person they would ever approve of. I led Jack into the living room, where my parents were already waiting, seated on the couch with the perfect poise that always made me feel small. Dad had his usual stern expression, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose as he flipped through a book. Mom, on the other hand, was meticulously arranging the decorative pillows, her eyes slightly too bright as she tried to mask her anxiety. I could see the questions in their eyes, the disapproval waiting to bubble to the surface. They'd been expecting someone else, someone like the boys Olivia had dated, successful, polished, and with a future they could approve of. And Jack, with his rough hands and free-spirited outlook on life, was the complete opposite. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice trembling despite myself, "this is Jack. He's someone really important to me." Jack gave them a warm smile and extended his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," he said, his voice steady and calm, his gaze never wavering from theirs. Despite the tension in the air, he didn't seem to be bothered by it. He was exactly the way I had come to admire him, unapologetically himself. But I could see the shift in my parents' expressions, the slight narrowing of my father's eyes as he looked Jack over, and the tightness in my mother's lips. They weren't fooled by Jack's charm. They saw what he wasn't, what he didn't fit into. He wasn't the image of success they had carefully curated for me. My mother's polite smile faltered just a little, but she quickly recovered. "Well, Jack, it's nice to meet you," my father said, his tone polite but distant, like he was sizing Jack up, looking for some reason to dismiss him. "What do you do for a living?" Jack didn't flinch at the question. He smiled, completely at ease. "I'm a carpenter. I work with wood, building custom furniture. I've always believed in doing work I love, even if it doesn't fit into the traditional idea of success." I could feel the tension in the room spike, and I immediately regretted this introduction. My parents weren't used to hearing anything like this, not from someone who was supposed to be a serious part of my life. The silence that followed was thick, as if they were trying to process the words Jack had just said, trying to find a way to fit them into their world, but it didn't fit. It didn't fit at all. My father was the first to break the silence. "I see," he said, his voice colder now, more critical. "And do you think that kind of work is sustainable? Reliable?" His words were sharp, like daggers aimed directly at Jack's way of life. Jack didn't back down. "I do," he said confidently. "There's dignity in creating something with your own hands, in building something that lasts. I've never been interested in climbing the corporate ladder, or fitting into a mold that doesn't suit me. I'd rather make my own path." I could see the disapproval radiating from my father now, like a wall that was slowly rising between us. It was clear he couldn't understand Jack's perspective, couldn't see the value in living a life of freedom, unbound by the expectations he had placed on me for so long. And as for my mother, her eyes were focused on Jack with a mix of concern and judgment, the lines of her mouth tightening with each passing second. Dinner that night was awkward, to say the least. Every attempt I made to steer the conversation towards something neutral was met with cool indifference. My father asked Jack a few more questions, but they were sharp, probing, always testing him in some way, looking for reasons to dismiss him as unworthy of me. Mom tried to keep up a facade of politeness, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She was thinking about the future she had always imagined for me, a future where Jack didn't belong. I sat there, feeling the space between us widen with every word they spoke, every question they asked that Jack answered with a kind smile, despite the obvious disapproval from my parents. The warmth I had always felt in their home, the sense of security was gone. It was replaced by a coldness that left me shivering inside. I could feel the tears pricking at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't. Not now, not in front of them. When dinner finally ended, my father stood up first, his usual reserve in place. "Thank you for dinner," he said curtly, his gaze never quite meeting Jack's. "We'll be in touch." Jack nodded, his smile never wavering, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes too. He had known it would be difficult, but I could tell this was harder than he had expected. I didn't know how to feel. I wanted so badly for my parents to accept him, to see what I saw in him. But all they saw was someone who didn't fit their vision for my life, someone who was too different, too free. As Jack and I left their house, the tension between us was palpable. The weight of their rejection hung heavy in the air, and I could feel my heart breaking with every step I took away from them. This was the life I had chosen, but I hadn't realized just how much it would cost me. I knew, deep down, that I was walking away from something, maybe even everything, that had always been a part of me. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. With Jack, I could finally breathe. Still, the question lingered in the back of my mind: would they ever accept him? Could they ever accept me for choosing him over the life they had planned for me? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain: I couldn't turn back now. The day my father gave me the ultimatum was the day I realized just how much I had already lost, and how much I stood to lose. It was a Sunday afternoon when Dad called me into his study, his voice stern as usual, but there was something different in it this time, something colder, more resolute. I had been expecting this moment, or something like it, but I wasn't prepared for the gravity of what was about to unfold. The study, with its walls lined with books and its heavy wooden desk that always seemed to command respect, had never felt so suffocating. When I entered, Dad was sitting behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him. His expression was one of calculated calm, but I could see the storm brewing beneath. Mom stood by the window, her back to me, her arms crossed tightly. The silence between us was unbearable. I felt the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me like a physical force, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Mia," Dad said, his voice low and steady, "I've tried to be patient with you. I've tried to understand your choices, but this is something I cannot ignore any longer." He looked up at me then, his gaze piercing. "You've chosen him, haven't you? This man, Jack. This is the life you want." I nodded, my heart pounding, but my voice was firm. "Yes, Dad, I've chosen him. He makes me happy in a way that I've never felt before. I know this isn't what you wanted for me, but I can't live my life for you anymore." The words were out, and I knew once they were spoken, there would be no going back. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Dad leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the surface of the desk as though calculating his next move. I could see the frustration in his eyes, the disbelief that I had chosen this path over the one he had planned for me. Then, in the same quiet, measured tone, he spoke the words that would change everything. "You have a choice to make, Mia," he said, his eyes hardening. "You can stay with us. You can continue the life we've built for you. You can pursue the future we've envisioned. But if you choose Jack, if you choose a life that doesn't align with everything we've worked for, then you'll be choosing to leave us. You'll be choosing to leave your family behind." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Leave my family behind? The thought of it was unbearable. But even more unbearable was the truth that I had already made my choice. I had chosen Jack. And no matter how much I loved my parents, no matter how much they had done for me, I couldn't live my life shackled to their expectations any longer. My throat tightened, and I could feel the tears welling in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent too many years trying to make them happy. Too many years bending to their will. It was time for me to take control of my own life, no matter the cost. "I love you both," I said, my voice breaking, "but I have to live my life for me. Jack makes me feel free. He makes me feel like I can finally be who I am, without the pressure to be perfect, without the weight of your expectations." Mom turned around then, her face pale, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Mia," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we only want what's best for you. We've worked so hard to give you everything, to give you the life we thought you wanted. Why can't you see that? Why can't you see that this isn't just about him, it's about everything we've built?" I shook my head, my heart breaking as I looked at her. "I see it, Mom, I do. But your vision of what's best for me isn't the same as mine. I have to choose my own path, even if it means disappointing you." Dad stood up then, his chair scraping against the floor with an angry screech. "This isn't about disappointment, Mia. It's about the future. It's about the reputation of this family, about the life we've worked so hard to create for you. Jack doesn't fit that future. He never will." The words stung, but I didn't let them cut deeper. I had heard them all before, the same tired arguments, the same insistence that success was the only thing that mattered. But I had come to realize that their vision of success wasn't mine. I didn't want a life built on others' expectations. I wanted a life of my own, a life that was authentic and true. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice firm despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "I'm choosing Jack. I can't keep living the life you want for me. I have to live the life I want." There was a long pause, and for a moment it felt like the entire world had stopped. I could see the hurt in their eyes, the shock and disbelief that their daughter was choosing this man, this life, over everything they had worked for. But there was something else in their eyes too, a glimmer of realization that I was no longer the daughter they had shaped, that I was no longer the person they thought I should be. Dad finally spoke, his voice cold and final. "Then you've made your choice, Mia. You're either with us or you're not. But if you choose him, you'll be leaving us behind. There's no coming back from that." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. I had known this moment would come. I had known it would be hard. But I also knew, deep down, that I couldn't live any other way. I couldn't live a life that wasn't mine. With a heavy heart, I turned and walked out of the study, Jack waiting for me at the door. The decision was made, but the cost of that decision was yet to be fully understood. As I left the house, I felt like I was stepping into a new world, one that was uncertain, terrifying, but also filled with the promise of freedom. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace. Life with Jack was everything I had never known I needed. After I walked away from my family, there was no turning back, but for the first time, I felt like I was finally living for myself. The weight of my parents' expectations had lifted, and in its place was a freedom I had longed for but never truly understood until now. We found a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the hustle and bustle of life seemed to fade away. The place was simple, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I loved it immediately. The walls were bare when we first moved in, but over time they became a reflection of who we were, our quirks, our love for simplicity, and the life we were starting to build together. Jack had always dreamed of a home filled with warmth, and even though we didn't have much, there was something beautiful about watching him put everything he had into making this place ours. Jack's carpentry business was taking off. Every day, he worked on new projects, creating pieces that were not only functional, but also works of art. I marveled at his skill, the way he could transform a piece of wood into something beautiful with his hands. It wasn't just the craftsmanship that amazed me, it was the way he approached life. He wasn't chasing success the way my parents had taught me to, but he was living authentically, following his passion, and pouring his heart into everything he did, and that was enough. I began working with him, managing the business side of things, scheduling appointments, coordinating with clients, and handling the finances. It was a challenge, but it was something I had never imagined doing before. I was proud of the work we were doing together, of the life we were building from the ground up. Each new project felt like a small victory, a sign that we were on the right path. The evenings were my favorite. We would sit at our little dining table, eating meals we'd cooked together, and talk about our dreams. Jack had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, of turning everyday moments into something meaningful. It was during these quiet moments that I realized just how much I had changed. I wasn't the person I had been when I walked away from my family. I wasn't the daughter my parents had tried to shape me into. I was becoming someone else, someone stronger, someone who knew what she wanted, and someone who was no longer afraid to fight for it. There were tough days, of course. Starting over wasn't easy. We faced financial struggles, the constant uncertainty that comes with trying to build something from nothing. There were nights when we didn't know how we were going to make ends meet, and I could see the worry in Jack's eyes. But even in those moments, there was always this unshakable belief between us, that as long as we had each other, we could handle anything that came our way. And then there were the little things, the small victories that made it all worth it. I remember the day Jack finished building the custom dining table for our apartment, his first big project since we moved in. It wasn't perfect by some standards, but to me, it was a masterpiece. We sat down for dinner that night, and I realized that this table, this small part of our home, represented everything we had worked for. It was a symbol of the life we were creating, a life built not on the expectations of others, but on the love and trust we had for each other. As the months passed, we settled into a rhythm, a quiet peace that I had never experienced before. I was starting to feel like I had found my place in the world, even if it wasn't the one my parents had imagined for me. We didn't have everything we wanted, but we had each other, and that was enough. It was more than enough. But even as we were building this new life, there was always a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had left my family behind, and while I didn't regret the decision, there was a part of me that still longed for their approval, for their acceptance. It wasn't that I wanted to go back to the life they had planned for me, but there were times when I missed them, when I missed the way things used to be before everything changed. Jack could see it too. He would hold me when I felt that sadness creeping in, when the memories of my family, of everything I had left behind, started to overwhelm me. "You're building something better now," he would say softly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "This is your life, Emma, and I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think." His words always had a way of calming the storm inside me, reminding me that I had made the right choice. As much as I missed my family, as much as I wished they could see me for who I had become, I knew deep down that I had to keep moving forward. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready for it. The road ahead wasn't clear, and there were still challenges to face. But with Jack by my side, I knew I could face anything. We were building a future together, and that was all that mattered. Every day was a step forward, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. The knock on the door came unexpectedly, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, when the air felt heavy with the warmth of the sun filtering through the windows. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart skipped a beat when I opened the door to find my parents standing there. The sight of them, especially after everything that had happened, was a shock to my system. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong in this life I had built with Jack, a life they had never approved of, but there they were, standing on the threshold of my home, looking out of place and out of time. My mother's face was pale, her usual composure replaced with a weary expression I'd never seen before. My father's jaw was tight, his posture rigid, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of desperation that I couldn't ignore. They weren't here for the kind of visit I'd imagined, the kind where they might apologize or ask for a chance to reconcile. No, this was something different. The uncertainty in the air was palpable, and I knew instinctively that something had changed, but I had no idea how much it would affect everything. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice low, tinged with a kind of urgency I'd never heard before. There was no warmth in his words, just the cold weight of something unsaid. I glanced at Jack, standing just behind me, his expression unreadable. I didn't know how to explain this to him, how to explain the turmoil this moment stirred inside me. My parents were here, but they weren't the parents I remembered. They weren't the same people who had made demands on my life, who had tried to control my every step. Something had shifted, something fundamental, and whatever it wasn't good. "Please let us in," my mother said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "This isn't easy, but we don't have anywhere else to go." My breath caught in my throat. They were asking for help. My parents, who had once been so proud, so self-assured in their rigid expectations, were standing here, vulnerable, desperate for something they had never asked for before. my help. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just as I had finally built the life I wanted, here they were, asking me to choose between the family I had left behind and the life I had worked so hard to build. I stepped back, letting them into the apartment, my mind racing. Jack's hand found mine, and his quiet strength was the only thing anchoring me in that moment. The tension in the air was suffocating, but I couldn't look away from my parents. They were no longer the authority figures who had dictated my life, but they were still my parents, and the weight of that relationship was undeniable. As we sat down, the conversation turned quickly to the crisis they were facing. My father's voice was shaky now, something I had never heard from him before. "I've lost my job," he said, his eyes briefly meeting mine before darting away. "A scandal at the university. It's been all over the news. They've ruined me." He swallowed hard, the words seeming to choke him. "And your mother. She's been trying to keep everything together. But we don't know where else to turn." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, the man who had always been in control, the man who had expected so much from me, was now asking for my help. The man who had once dismissed my choices, who had demanded I live according to his vision of success, was standing before me, broken, asking for my support. And then it hit me, the reality of the situation. My parents weren't here for reconciliation. They weren't here to make amends or to apologize for how they had treated me. No, they were here because they had nowhere else to turn. They had been disowned by Olivia and her husband, and now they were desperate for my help. The realization was crushing. I could feel the pull of my old life, the familiar weight of responsibility I had carried for so long. But this time, I wasn't the same person. I wasn't the daughter who had been expected to make sacrifices for the good of the family. I wasn't the person who would bend to their will just because they needed me. Jack squeezed my hand, and I could see the understanding in his eyes. He knew how hard this was for me. He knew what this would cost, what it would mean to open the door to my parents again after everything they had done. But he also knew that the decision was mine to make. "We've built a life here," I said softly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "A life that's ours, that's built on our terms. I can't go back to the way things were, to the life you wanted for me. I've already made my choice." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. My father's face was hard, but I could see the struggle behind his eyes, the battle between his pride and the reality of the situation. They had come to me out of desperation, but I couldn't let that pull me back into the life I had worked so hard to leave behind. For a moment, there was only silence. The tension between us was thick, and I could feel the weight of their disappointment, but I didn't flinch. I had made my decision. I had chosen Jack, and that choice was final. "I'm sorry," I said quietly but firmly. "I can't help you in the way you want me to. I've already chosen the life I'm going to live. I can't undo that." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. My parents didn't speak for a long time after that. I could see the pain in their eyes, but there was something else there too, something that I had never seen before, understanding. They may not have agreed with me, but they could no longer deny that I was no longer their little girl, the one who would always follow their path. The door closed behind them, and with it, the finality of the choice I had made. The ties that had once bound us were now severed. And though the weight of that loss still lingered, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I was no longer living in anyone's shadow. I was finally living my truth, with Jack by my side, and that was enough. As the days turned into months, the weight of the decision I had made began to feel less like a burden, and more like the foundation of a life I was proud to call my own. Jack and I had created something that was ours, a life built from the ground up, where every piece of furniture, every shared meal, every conversation, was a reflection of the love and freedom we had fought so hard to find. It wasn't always easy, but it was ours, and that was enough. We had learned how to navigate the ups and downs of life together. There were still days of uncertainty, moments when the world outside seemed to pull at us, trying to convince us that we weren't enough, that our unconventional life didn't measure up to the standards of success that so many people, including my family, had tried to impose on us. But every time I looked at Jack, I knew we were doing exactly what we were meant to do. He wasn't just the love of my life, he was my partner in every sense of the word, With him, I felt like I could face anything. One evening, as we sat on the couch, our worn-out but beloved cushions cradling us, Jack turned to me with a look of quiet determination in his eyes. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. I nodded, my heart swelling with love. We have. And we're just getting started. There was something about that moment, about the stillness between us, that felt like the beginning of something even bigger. I knew that the journey we had started together wasn't over. It was just the foundation, the beginning of the life we were going to continue building. There would be challenges, no doubt. But I also knew that as long as we had each other, we could handle anything that came our way. The next morning, Jack and I found ourselves sitting at the small kitchen table we had built together, drinking coffee and discussing the future. We talked about the plans we had, dreams of expanding his business, maybe even moving to a bigger place someday, though for now, we were content in our little apartment. We talked about starting a family, a dream that had grown quietly in the background of our lives, a dream that felt more and more real with every passing day. "I know we've both been through a lot," Jack said, his fingers gently brushing against mine. "But I really believe that everything we've been through has brought us to this point, and I wouldn't change a thing." I smiled, my heart full. Neither would I. Every step, every choice, every challenge, it's all led us here, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else but here, with you. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like something was missing. I didn't feel the ache of my parents' disapproval or the fear of not measuring up to the life they had envisioned for me. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I was exactly where I was meant to be, with Jack. As the weeks went by, we worked hard to build a future together. Jack's carpentry business continued to grow, and I found myself managing more and more of the operations, finding new clients, and organizing projects. We spent our evenings discussing our plans, dreaming of the life we would create, one that was not defined by others, but by the love and hard work we poured into it. One day, as we were walking through a park, Jack stopped and looked at me with a gleam in his eye. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice full of excitement, "maybe we should take the next step. Maybe it's time to make this even more permanent." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" Jack smiled, pulling something from his pocket, a small, simple wooden box. Inside was a ring, not an extravagant one, but one that was perfect in its simplicity. "Will you marry me, Emma?" he asked, his voice full of love and hope. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at him, overwhelmed by the moment. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Yes, I will." The future stretched out before us, a canvas waiting to be filled with the life we would continue to build together. It wasn't going to be perfect, but it would be ours. And for the first time in my life, I felt ready to face whatever came next. As I looked at Jack, the man who had given me the courage to live my truth, I knew that no matter what happened, we would face it together. This was just the beginning. Our story was still unfolding, and there was so much more ahead, so much more love, laughter, and adventure to come. With Jack by my side, I knew I was finally living the life I was always meant to live. A life that was true, that was mine. And as we stood there, hand in hand, looking ahead to the future, I couldn't help but smile. This was it. The life I had dreamed of, the life I had fought for, was finally becoming a reality. Summer passed by quickly, and with each new day, Jack and I grew more certain of the life we were building together. The peace we had found in our small apartment, with its walls filled with memories and handcrafted furniture, was something I had never imagined for myself. But life was never just about the good times. Sometimes, when everything seemed to be settling, the reality of what we had left behind would creep back into our minds. One evening, as Jack and I sat in the living room, the warm glow of the yellow lights casting a soft ambiance over the small dining table we had just finished building, my phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from Olivia, my sister. I could feel the tension in her words, the coldness in her simple greeting, and then the final line, "We want you to come back. Mom and Dad need you." A part of me was immediately swept with a rush of emotions, guilt, sadness, and a deep ache that I had tried to ignore. The thought of them needing me, of the family I had walked away from, hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I was pulled back into a past I had spent so long trying to escape. I looked at Jack, who had been quietly watching me, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What is it?" he asked softly, his hand reaching out to take mine. I showed him the message. His eyes scanned the screen, and for a long moment there was silence. It wasn't the first time Olivia had reached out, but this felt different. The desperation in her words wasn't just about family pride or disappointment. It was something deeper. "I don't know, Jack," I whispered, feeling a knot form in my stomach. I thought I was done with all of that. I thought we had built something real, something that was ours. Jack squeezed my hand, his steady gaze never leaving mine. "We have, Emma, and nothing can change that. But if you need to go, if you feel like you owe them something, I'll be here, whatever you decide." I couldn't explain it, but his words settled me. He wasn't holding me back, but he wasn't asking me to choose between them either. He was offering me the space to make my own decision, as he always had. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled in two directions. On one hand, there was the life I had built with Jack, simple, honest, and full of love. On the other, there was my family, the one I had left behind, the one that still held a piece of me. Even though I had tried to sever those ties, Jack could see the inner conflict, and he didn't push me. Instead, he reminded me of the strength I had shown in walking away before. He encouraged me to remember why I had chosen this path, to live freely, to be true to myself, and to not let anyone, not even my family, dictate my future. Still, the ache of their absence, of their need for me, was something I couldn't ignore. Finally, I decided to visit them, to face the truth head-on. Jack came with me for support, though I knew the choice was mine. When we arrived at my parents' house, the place I had once called home, I was struck by how much had changed. The house was still the same, but there was a sadness in the air, an unspoken heaviness that wasn't there before. My parents were waiting for me in the living room, both of them looking older, more fragile than I remembered. "We didn't want to lose you, Emma," my mother said, her voice trembling as she reached out to me. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we were helping you find your way." I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret that had never been voiced before. It was a stark contrast to the woman who had once held such rigid expectations for me. My father sat quietly, his usual stern expression softened by the vulnerability I hadn't known he was capable of. "I understand, Mom," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you thought you were doing what was best for me. But I couldn't keep living for you. I had to find my own way." There was a long silence, the weight of my words hanging between us. My father finally spoke, his voice rough and low. "We've made a lot of mistakes, Emma. But we don't want to lose you. Your mother and I. We've both been struggling with this, with everything." It was then that I realized just how much had changed, not just in them, but in me. I had spent so many years fighting for my independence, for a life that was my own. And now, standing in front of my parents, I could see that we were all different. They had finally seen me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. And I had learned to let go of the anger, to forgive them for what they had done. "I'm not asking you to come back," my father continued, his voice filled with regret. "I just want you to know that we love you, and we're sorry for everything." Tears welled up in my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. I had never imagined that this moment would come, that my parents would reach out to me in this way. But now, standing here, I realized that we were finally at a place where we could move forward, separately, yes, but with mutual respect and understanding. I looked at Jack, who had been standing quietly beside me the whole time. He smiled, offering me the strength I needed. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his unwavering support. "We're okay now," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was full. "I'm okay." And with that, I knew I'd reached a turning point. My life with Jack was not just a choice I had made, it was the life I had fought for. And even though the past still held its weight, I was no longer living in its shadow. We had a future to build together, a future where we would continue to create something true, something meaningful, no longer bound by the past, but shaped by the love we had for each other. Together, we would move forward, and no matter what the future held, I knew we could face it as we always had, side by side. The months that followed felt like a new chapter unfolding, one where Jack and I could finally breathe without the suffocating weight of past expectations. As our relationship with my parents slowly shifted into something healthier, something more genuine, we both embraced the quiet freedom we had fought so hard to achieve. We were learning to live with the decisions we had made, and each day felt like a reaffirmation of the life we had chosen. Jack's business continued to grow. It wasn't without its struggles, of course. There were days when we wondered if we had bitten off more than we could chew, but those moments of doubt never lasted long. We had built something together, brick by brick, and no matter how small or uncertain it seemed, we could feel the strength in it. The projects we worked on, the clients we met, the small victories, they all added up. Each success, no matter how modest, was a testament to our perseverance. And then, something unexpected happened. A week before Christmas, Jack came home with a surprise I hadn't seen coming. He had saved up for months to make it happen, and when he handed me the small envelope with a ribbon tied around it, I couldn't help but laugh. "Is this one of those open it when you're ready things?" I teased, raising an eyebrow at him. He grinned, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Just open it." I carefully untied the ribbon and pulled out the folded piece of paper. It took me a moment to register what it was. An offer for a small piece of land on the outskirts of the city, the perfect space to expand his workshop and, possibly, to build a new home. "Jack," I gasped, looking up at him in disbelief. This is incredible. Are you sure about this?" He nodded, his gaze steady. "We've worked so hard, Emma. I think it's time we take that next step. I can't think of anyone I'd rather share this with than you. It's ours if you want it." I felt the rush of emotions flood through me, surprise, excitement, a sense of wonder, and the kind of deep gratitude I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a piece of land, it was a symbol of everything we had built together. A home, a future, a life that was entirely ours. "I want it," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I want to build it with you. I want to build everything with you, Jack." And just like that, we had a new goal to work toward. The next few months were a whirlwind of planning, meetings with architects, and dreaming about what this new chapter would look like. We decided to build not just a home, but a workshop where Jack could craft his pieces, a space where we could live and create freely, without the constraints of the world outside. The land was perfect, secluded enough to offer peace and privacy, but close enough to the city that we could still be part of the community. As we worked together, our bond grew stronger. We spent hours talking about the future, about what we wanted for ourselves, for the life we were building. The challenges were many, but with each challenge came a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that we were on the right path. We faced them all side by side, and I knew that as long as we had each other, we could handle anything. And then came the day we finally moved into our new home. It wasn't finished yet, there were still details to be ironed out, but we were here, and that was all that mattered. The first night we spent there, sitting on the floor surrounded by boxes, with the smell of fresh wood in the air and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside, felt like a dream come true. It was our dream, built from the ground up, and it was everything I had ever wanted. "I can't believe we're here," I said, leaning against Jack, my heart full as I looked around at our new home. "This is ours." He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "It is. And it's just the beginning." In that moment, I realized just how far we had come, from the days when I felt lost in my family's expectations, to the days when I was unsure if we could really build something out of nothing. Now, here we were, together, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever the future held. We had built something real, something lasting. It was our future, and it was just beginning. The days ahead weren't going to be without challenges. Life never was. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly prepared to face them. With Jack by my side, I knew we would continue to grow, to build, and to live a life that was authentic to who we were. No more pretending, no more living for someone else, just us. And whatever came next, we would face it together, with courage and love, and that was all I needed. As we settled into our new home, the space began to feel like it had always been ours. There were still boxes to unpack and projects to complete, but every corner we filled, every wall we painted, and every small change we made felt like a step toward building the life we had envisioned. Jack's business continued to grow, and with each new order, each new client, I saw the pride in his eyes. I had never seen him so fulfilled, so content with the path he had chosen. It wasn't about making millions or achieving societal success. It was about doing something he loved, something that brought him joy, and creating a space where we could both thrive. And I felt the same way. As the seasons changed, we started talking more about the future. Jack would often sit at the table, sketching out designs for the workshop, while I worked on the business side of things. It was a quiet rhythm that we had developed, one that felt natural and fulfilling. We spoke of expanding, of hiring a few hands to help with the growing demand. But we never lost sight of the fact that we were building something for us, not for anyone else. One rainy afternoon, as I was organizing some paperwork in the office, Jack came into the room with a look in his eyes I couldn't quite place. He was holding something behind his back, and when he stepped forward, he revealed a small wooden box. My heart skipped a beat. "I was thinking," he said softly, kneeling in front of me. "We've come so far, Emma, and I want to make sure you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I'm here for the long haul. This, everything we've built, is just the beginning. And I can't imagine my life without you." Tears welled up in my eyes as he opened the box, revealing a ring. It wasn't extravagant, but it was perfect in its simplicity, just like the life we'd created together. "I want you to be my partner, in every sense of the word," Jack continued, his voice filled with emotion. "Will you marry me?" I was overwhelmed by the gesture, by the love that filled the room, by the life we had created together. I didn't need any grand gestures, any elaborate plans. This was enough. It was everything. "Yes," I whispered, barely able to hold back the tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." The days that followed were filled with joy and anticipation. We didn't want a big wedding, no elaborate celebrations. What we wanted was simple, a ceremony that was as meaningful and intimate as the life we had built. We decided to get married on the piece of land where we were planning to build our future, surrounded by the trees we had planted and the house we had already started to make our home. It felt right. Our small wedding was everything we had hoped for. The ceremony was simple, but the love that filled the air was tangible. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, Jack's eyes locked with mine, and I could feel my heart swell. This was the moment I had always dreamed of, standing beside the person who had supported me, loved me, and helped me find my own path. When we exchanged vows, there were no grand speeches, no promises of perfect love. Just a simple truth. We were ready to face the world together, no matter what came our way. After the ceremony, we stood side by side, looking out at the future we were building together. The challenges of the past seemed so far behind us now. We had moved beyond the expectations of others, beyond the shadows of who we were supposed to be. We had finally become the people we were always meant to be, authentic, free, and deeply in love. As we danced under the stars that night, surrounded by only a few close friends, I couldn't help but think of everything that had brought us here. The struggles, the sacrifices, the painful decisions, but most of all, the love that had carried us through it all. And I knew, in that moment, that no matter what the future held, we would face it together. Whatever challenges came our way, whatever new dreams we chased, we would always have each other. We had built something real, something beautiful, and I had no doubt that our journey together was only just beginning. This was our future, our life, our love, our everything, and I couldn't wait to see what was next. With Jack by my side, I knew there was nothing we couldn't overcome. The world was ours, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free to live it on my terms. And I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, our life continued to grow, both in ways I had imagined and in ways I never could have predicted. Our little workshop became a hub of creativity and passion. Jack poured his heart into each piece he crafted, and I watched with admiration as his business flourished. It wasn't about the money, it was about the pride he took in his work, the love he poured into each creation, and, as always, I was right there beside him, handling the details that allowed his dreams to take shape. We decided to take the plunge and hire a few people to help, expanding Jack's business just a bit more. I loved the process, the interviewing, the planning, the feeling that we were creating something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after we were gone. But even with all the excitement of the business, what filled my heart most was coming home at the end of the day. Our home, our sanctuary, was everything I had always dreamed of, and more. It was during one of those quiet evenings, after a long day of work, that Jack and I sat on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of view we'd never get tired of. Jack turned to me, his face softer now, his gaze thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and steady. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I smiled, leaning into him. "Yeah, we have. Sometimes it feels like it was all a dream, leaving everything behind and starting over. But then I look around, and I know this is exactly where we're meant to be." He nodded, his eyes locked on mine. "I feel the same way, and I think we've learned a lot along the way. But there's something else I've been thinking about, something that, I don't know, feels like the next step." I felt my heart skip a beat, unsure of what he was getting at. "What do you mean?" Jack took a deep breath, looking up at the stars before turning back to me. "What if we expanded even more? What if we took this workshop, this life we've built, and made it a part of something bigger?" My mind raced as I tried to process his words. "Bigger how?" He smiled softly. "What if we opened a store, a place where we could not only sell our work, but also share our journey, our story? We could create a space that reflects everything we believe in, authenticity, passion, the kind of life we've built together." The idea hit me like a wave, but in the best possible way. A store. It was a big step, a huge leap into uncharted territory, but it felt right. It felt like the next natural evolution of everything we had worked for. The thought of turning our dreams into something even more tangible, something that other people could experience, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack laughed softly. "I've never been more serious. We've come so far, Emma. And I believe in us. I believe in what we've built. Why not take it further? Why not share it with the world?" I could see the fire in his eyes, the same passion that had driven him when he started his business. And in that moment, I realized that Jack was right. We had built something strong, something real, and it was time to take the next step. We had already proven that we could create our own path. Now it was time to let others see what we had to offer. "I'm in," I said, a wide smile spreading across my face. "Let's do it." And just like that, we had a new dream to chase, a new goal to work toward. The next few months were filled with excitement and chaos as we worked to bring this new vision to life. There were setbacks, times when things didn't go according to plan, moments of doubt when we wondered if we were doing the right thing. But through it all, we leaned on each other, and I never once doubted that this was the right decision for us. Finally, the store opened its doors. It wasn't much, just a small, cozy space, filled with pieces of furniture that Jack had crafted with his own hands. A few shelves filled with products we had sourced from local artisans, and a corner where we shared our story. The store felt like an extension of us, a place where people could come and see the love, the passion, and the hard work that had gone into everything we did. When we opened the doors for the first time, there was a moment of quiet, the kind of silence that comes before something big happens. I looked at Jack, and he smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that I had come to love so much. Together, we had built this store, this life, this future. And though I couldn't predict exactly what the future would bring, I knew one thing for sure. We were ready for whatever came next. We had done the impossible. We had created something from nothing, and now we were ready to share it with the world. This was our life, and it was more beautiful than I had ever dreamed. From this point on, Emma and Jack's journey was only just beginning. With their hearts full of hope, their hands crafting a future together, and the lessons they had learned along the way, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, always side by side. As we close this chapter of Emma and Jack's journey, I want to take a moment to thank you for being part of their story. If you've enjoyed following their path, the love, the struggles, and the triumphs, I would love for you to join us for more. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the next adventure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story, what resonated with you the most, and what you'd like to see next. Drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue creating content that inspires and entertains. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to share more with you soon.